Hello everyone, my name is Welsh217, but you can just call me Welsh. I am currently in between games again, and you know what that means. It's time for another episode of So Bad, It's Brilliant. The show where I talk to you guys about movies that are so crappy that they're fun to watch. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about a movie that's a little further back than what I meant to have on my spectrum. Originally, my thought was going to be, I'll keep it post-1990. This movie was too good. Well, not good, but perfect for this show. It's a film from 1986 called Trick or Treat. One of those movies meant to appease the prevalent 1980s rocker. You know, your Skid Row fans and your Ozzy Osbourne fans, post-Black Sabbath, Randy Rhoads era. You know what I'm talking about. It's a great little bit of nostalgia, especially if you're a fan of music, especially some of the 80s metal rocker guys, you know. I can get into it. In a very special way, this movie has a little bit of sentimental value to me, mainly because I'm a metalhead myself. Not necessarily 80s metal, but I still love me some Metallica and Slayer, so hey, this movie appeals to me just a little bit. But enough about all that. Let's dive into the plot of this piece of garbage, shall we? This movie starts out with our main character, Eddie Weinbauer, nicknamed Ragman.
It's me again, Ragman. Well, the song remains the same. Total conflict. Them against us.
He's a metalhead who's in high school, and he's picked on by all the jocks for being a weirdo and a metalhead. The whole first couple of minutes of the film is just pretty much these jocks picking on him in a pretty brutal way, actually. They pretty much psych him out by throwing one of his favorite tapes into the gymnasium after he's gotten out of the shower and swiping his towel. So yeah, full male nudity within the first, I don't know, maybe like 5 minutes of this movie. Hell, it's even in the intro. I don't think we've even passed the credits at this point. It's during this moment we start to see Eddie's love interest, I guess. Pretty much, this girl is laughing along with all the other teenage girls playing volleyball in that moment. She slowly begins to frown, and you can see that she's having sympathy for Eddie. That's about the only indication that there's a love interest going on. Movie does fuck all to explain it any further than that. We're also introduced to Eddie's best friend, Roger.
Edward, where were you this morning? You missed the midterm.
Another high school outcast who's kind of the nerdy type.
So, what do you think?
Oh, it's loud, fast, and thrashing. A little bit short on the melody, but...
Just a bit. We kind of get the sense that Eddie is this big fan of a fictional rock and roller called Sammy Kerr.
You did it, man. You went to this fucking school and you rose above it.
He happens to catch a news broadcast talking about him where he's sort of defending the politics of metal.
Growing up around politics, politicians, and those values.
Mr. Kerr, this is
What
not...
I'm saying here is you cannot legislate morality.
Mr. Kerr,
or music,
there is no
or people's minds. Or we'll bring you down, man.
I have a teenage daughter.
We'll bring you down.
Sort of. In that same moment, though, Eddie realizes that the broadcast is talking about Sammy's death, that he died in a mysterious fire.
Again, rock star Sammy Kerr, victim of a hotel fire, dead at age 38.
In the following scenes, we get a couple of things. One, Eddie goes to his favorite radio DJ, who's a friend of his, the DJ named Nuke.
Wow!
Hey, Ragman!
Nuke also happens to be played by Gene Simmons of Kiss. One of 2 cameos, by the way, in this film. Eddie has gone to Nuke to sort of talk about Sammy's death, and Nuke is actually sort of the reasonable side of the conversation, in a way, and Eddie shouldn't take it quite so seriously. In that same note, Nuke bestows upon Eddie the one and only copy of the last record that Sammy Kerr put out, called Songs in the Key of Death. Fucking metal.
I got something for you. You know what this is? It's the last record of the Kerr legacy.
Runs home and immediately puts the record on, and he's listening to it, and he's sad about Sammy's death, and suddenly he starts having this dream, this sort of like ritual imagery starts to play, and it's Sammy in the center of this circle. As the climax of this dream starts to happen, Eddie sort of shakes himself awake, and he realizes that there's something going on with the record where it sounds like there's this backwards talking going on. And so he stops the record, he puts his finger on it, starts to gently spin it backwards.
Let the big fish hook themselves. You're the bait. The bait is you.
The record begins to give him subliminal messages of how he can take revenge on all of these jocks. Also, on a side note, before I forget about it, part of the storyline, and it's poorly explained, just like everything else in this movie, Sammy attended the same high school as Eddie. That kind of becomes important later, but I'll get to that. Eddie starts following the instructions of the record to take revenge on the jocks that have been fucking with him this whole time. He gets a message, you're the bait is you, and so he decides to slam a food tray in the leader of the jocks' face.
Eat this.
And then run after he's already set up this obstacle course so that all the jocks sort of slip and fall. One of the jocks ends up grabbing a fire extinguisher and goes into the room that he thinks Eddie ran into and ends up spraying a whole bunch of teachers with fire extinguishing foam. Although, how he wouldn't realize in the first second that he's made a terrible mistake, I don't know, because he just keeps fucking spraying them. So as the story progresses, it gets harsher than that. The record starts to tell him more and more subliminal messages, where as he follows them, people start to get a little bit closer to getting killed. Eventually it gets to the point where Eddie gives the main jock a peace offering, which is a tape that he's recorded. Shortly after that, we find that the main jock and his girlfriend are making out in their car. He gets out to take a piss, because, you know, right in the middle of making out with a cute girl. Nature calls, I guess.
Yeah, I gotta go.
She happens to grab that tape, which is in the back of the dude's car, pops in and listens to some music. I'm saving this moment for one of my 3 points, so we'll get back to that, but she nearly gets killed, basically. Eddie starts to become a little bit more cautious about the record, and he's like, people are getting hurt really badly, this is not what I wanted, I just don't like him, I don't necessarily want to kill him.
Kill them all. Come on, man. Now, she wound up in the hospital. Now, this is very serious.
As it becomes clear that Eddie doesn't want to kill people, he realizes that the record is communicating with him directly, which means he's talking to the record and telling the record that he doesn't want to go through this anymore, and that eventually invokes the wrath of Sammy Kerr. Sammy appears. we come to find out that he's actually going to attempt to take his revenge on the entire high school. So, Eddie tells his friend Roger to go to the jock's car, break into it, steal the tape back, and destroy it. Of course, Roger doesn't do that because that wouldn't forward the plot at all. What's the point of that? Roger plays it for himself because he just, he's curious. He wants to hear it. Of course, Sammy appears in his living room, threatens him to play the tape at the high school Halloween dance.
Of a massive hemorrhage of the brain, leading to speculation that he may have
Roger.
been a victim of foul play.
I am a big fan of yours. I have all your records.
Shut up!
Gilstrom seemed to have self-destructed. Our weekly focus
Play
segment looks
my
at the
tape for
vision.
me
What happens our
tonight.
guest,
Well,
Sylvia
I-
Savelle, was a close friend of
Or
the
die.
late Gilstrom.
Anyway, Roger takes the tape to the dance, plays it, and unleashes Sammy Kerr, and Sammy begins zapping all the high school students. Keep in mind that Sammy, when he died, and they say this in the newscast, they actually say his age, dead at the age of 38. So the dude was almost 40 years old, so he's just taking revenge on a bunch of high school students that had nothing to do with how he was treated in high school, which is supposed to be a big part of Sammy's story and why he's encouraging Eddie to basically kill his fellow students. So eventually what happens is Eddie realizes that when Nuke gave him the record, he told him that he already had copied it, and that he's going to play the tape at midnight on Halloween. Well, if just playing the tape at the high school thing would allow him to pop out of the stereo, what do you think is going to happen if he plays it over the radio? Eddie and Leslie, who have pretty much hooked up at this point, go running to the radio station so they can stop the recording. And then, of course, just like any good 80s movie that deals with rock and roll or metal, the way that Eddie coaxes Sammy into appearing to him so he can destroy him is by calling him a poser.
Rock's chosen warrior is nothing but a fucking whip poser!
Sammy pops up while Eddie's driving a car. Eddie jumps out and the car goes flying into a river. Apparently the contact with the water kills Sammy. The end. Now, this movie is very low budget, so there are a lot of things to touch on about why it's so bad, it's brilliant, and it's really hard to narrow it down to 3 main points. But I think I figured out how I'm gonna do this. So here are my 3 main points of why Trick or Treat is so bad, it's brilliant. Point number 1, continuity errors. Just blatant. Sometimes when it comes to movies that have plot holes or continuity errors, sometimes you don't really notice them. You have to look into the Wikipedia or the IMDb to point them out, and then you go back and watch it. But this is so blatantly obvious. There's so many moments like that. The way that Sammy is defeated by water, apparently without anyone explaining it to us. I had a theory that it was, okay, Sammy, since he's embodying, like, electricity, I guess, he can go in through things that are plugged in. But he appears through Eddie's car stereo. That's not plugged into anything. So through what method is Sammy Kerr basically teleporting to other locations? It's never explained. They have no consistency with it whatsoever. He's already materialized and can jump back in electronic devices and travel through them later in the film, yet he still has to tell Roger to go play the tape at the Halloween dance in order for him to materialize there. But he can just jump in and out of anything at random later on in the movie. He doesn't have to be necessarily played through it. He just starts teleporting through shit without the music being played. So that doesn't make any sense. And there are so many different moments in the film where that type of thing happens. Point number 2. A lot of the music in the movie is 1980s metal, but there is a moment where there's some inconsistency with the bands that show up, the sort of band memorabilia that Eddie has. It wasn't too bad. Most of it's pretty consistent with 1980s metal, but there's a moment where there's a whole several scenes that take place in a single day of him being at school, and he's wearing an Alternative Tentacles t-shirt. If you don't know, Alternative Tentacles is the record label that was started by Jello Biafra of the Dead Kennedys. Dead Kennedys isn't a metal band, they're a punk band. As far as genres go, especially in the 1980s, metalheads and punk kids were usually relatively separate, or at least as far as like the stereotypes go at the very least. So that was a major inconsistency where I think more of the people who were involved in making the film wanted to throw that little Easter egg in there. But it doesn't really make in any sense given the musical genre that they've tried to sort of stay in with Eddie being a metalhead. Also, with those same references, we have our second cameo, which is Ozzy Osbourne, but he appears as a fourth wall cameo, which means that he shows up on a TV in the movie.
You honestly think it's
Go right ahead.
gonna drive my long steel missile down on your love channel. Deep, deep, you'll beg for more. Raising hell and serpent score. Feel me, feel me. Now, what does that mean to you? To me, it means nothing but a sexual act.
Here's the thing, though. We see Ozzy Osbourne posters all over Eddie's room, right? But when Ozzy Osbourne does the cameo, he's playing a fictional character making fun of religious figureheads criticizing metal during the 1980s, saying that it was satanic and overly sexual and not appropriate for children and we should just ban it altogether. But if Eddie is such a huge fucking metalhead, wouldn't he still recognize Ozzy Osbourne? This kind of goes along with my first point of just the inconsistencies, but it's still just hilarious. Plus his cameo is kind of funny. It's before Ozzy was fried, so he's still relatively making sense. You can understand the words that are coming out of his mouth at the very least. Point number 3. The special effects in the movie are great. They're so cheap. Just that cheap digitized overlay where it just looks like something made of lasers is just laid over the top of the screen. There's a part where in the part where the girl gets her ears melted by the headphones. But the way that shows up is as she's listening to the music, these like ghostly green smoky fingers undress her. Because gratuitous nudity for no apparent reason. 1980s movies! And then she has her eyes closed and I guess she's fucking the music, I don't know. But then she opens her eyes and there's this big fucking lizard thing looming over her. She screams, and then the Jocko boyfriend comes back in the car and her ears have been melted to the headphones. But there's no reason for there to be a monster, and the special effect is pretty bad but awesome. Also, when Sammy starts basically shooting lightning out of the end of his guitar and vaporizing all the high school students. Anytime Sammy just materializes, there's goofy-ass electricity effect that they use. And one of my favorite moments is when Sammy threatens Roger. On the TV behind him, Sammy notices that there's this woman who's basically talking about why metal is such a bad influence or whatever. Sammy looks at the TV and he reaches into the TV, grabs the woman, and pulls her out as like this fried corpse.
Maggie, it's a sad day for all of us. But as it becomes...
Because reasons. That's pretty much it. I mean, the special effects are a lot of fun, but they're just terribly cheap. I kind of have a theory that they basically blew the budget on asking Gene Simmons and Ozzy Osbourne to be in the movie, and I think that's all they had the budget for, to be able to get those guys to do that.
Wake up, sleepyheads. It's party time.
Anyway, guys, those are my 3 points about why this movie is so bad that it's good. If you haven't seen this film, I recommend you watch it, especially just a great, like, shitty Halloween movie. I mean, you could watch it any time of the year. Really, the movie has nothing to do with Halloween whatsoever. I think it was just a marketing ploy. It was released on October 24th, 1986, so obviously they were trying to release the movie as a Halloween-themed movie, but it has borderline nothing to do with Halloween other than the dance, and you see a couple jack-o'-lanterns later. The Halloween thing is so not central to the plot. It's fucking hilarious. That's gonna wrap it up for this episode of So Bad It's Brilliant. As always, I appreciate you joining me. Thank you so much for the support. Don't forget to like or share, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.